Welcome to Fast Politics, Justin Wolfers.
Hey, Molly.
Things are going great.
Good. I didn't even ask.
Yeah, it's going real well. In case you're wondering, so let's talk about tariffs and how
Let's do
great
it.
it's going.
I
So
have a
go,
challenge for you, Molly.
yeah.
Yours is the only show I ever go on and swear.
Yes, excellent.
And my challenge is let's not do that. Let's not do liberal rage. I feel it. The listeners feel it, whether they're liberal or
Even
not, because
Leonidas, the hairless dog, feels it.
no one likes to see their quality of life destroyed.
Yes.
But my challenge for you is the issues are too big and too important. And I think there's nothing more important we can do today than explain it in the nerdiest possible ways so that our listeners know what's happening to their world. So no swearing, let's wonk out.
All right. I can't believe no swearing. I'm the least sweary of many people I'm on with. I'm like the grown up, and now you are becoming the grown up in the room, which is, you know.
Yeah,
All
there's
right.
some other
So
rooms we need some grown-ups in.
speaking of a room with no grown ups, the White House. Discuss.
So obviously there was the big tariff announcement. The big news for everyone is very, very large tariffs from the United States.
Right.
Bigger than the Smoot-Hawley tariffs that Ben Stein joked about in Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
They crashed the economy last time.
That was called the Great Depression.
Yes, I remember. I wasn't alive then.
If you compare our tariff rates to those of other industrialized countries, they are now 10 to 20 times larger. So we are getting cut off from the rest of the world to a degree that no one else at our level of economic development or in the modern era does. So that's the big news. And I don't want to lose sight of that. But actually, you were asking about the White House. And so what's even crazier is it's completely clear that they did no homework.
Mm-hmm.
So what we now have is very different tariffs for very different countries. Trump calls these retaliatory or he calls them reciprocal tariffs.
Typical. Yeah.
They're hurting us, we'll hurt them.
Right.
It is impossible to have tariffs that are 10 or 20 times larger than other people and for that to be reciprocity. Like the mathematics of that, I hope are obvious. There is still, a well-spread talking point among the Fox News set where people believe that we're getting ripped off by other countries. Look, here's the truth. Economy's a big pie. There are small slices and small slivers where there are active interest groups and national traditions and so on, which are indulge in protectionism, enough that it gives Trump's folks talking points. But don't lose sight of the reality that in a modern economy, tariff rates average 1 or 2%, not 20%. So this is not reciprocal tariffs. This is American tariffs. This is big walls around the country. If you want to think about it in metaphorical terms, what Trump has done is thrown rocks in the harbors of all of our ports, made it harder for anyone else to enter. And the retaliatory tariffs make it harder for ships to leave. We're now less integrated with the rest of the world.
So where do you think they came up with these numbers? Sorry.
It is hard to explain the degree of incompetence behind this, but let's nerd out for a little bit, okay? Mm-hmm. I don't think you should worry, but you could worry about something called our trade deficit. Our trade deficit is that we buy more stuff from abroad than they buy from us.
Right, because it's cheaper to manufacture in places like Vietnam than it is in places like Michigan.
You don't even need an economist. I buy stuff from abroad because I want to. I buy Australian wine because it tastes better.
Yeah, well.
I buy my kids' toys from China because they're cheaper. There's no economy out there. There's you and I and your listeners making decisions. And it turns out the decisions that I make are I buy Vietnamese-made T-shirts because they're cheap.
Yeah.
And I'm cheap.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's my business.
Right.
So we have
sounding very American here. Go on. Yes.
I believe in freedom, my friend. My T-shirts that I buy from Vietnam have eagles on them. and fireworks. So we have a trade deficit. Now, there are two ways of describing this. Whenever we trade, when I buy a T-shirt, I send pieces of paper over to Vietnam. Those pieces of paper are called US dollars, and they send me pieces of cloth back. If what you thought the most important thing in life was pieces of paper, you would be very upset that America has more pieces of paper leaving than it has coming back.
Mm-hmm.
It turns I've tried to wear pieces of paper. They don't keep you warm. My T-shirt with the eagle and the fireworks and the freedom does keep me warm. So as much as we run a trade deficit in dollars, we run a trade surplus in stuff.
Right.
So that's why I'm not so worried about that. But President Trump is. Okay, fair enough. He probably had a very bad teacher at the Wharton School many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But then what he worries about is something different. He worries about our trade deficit with each individual country.
Right.
What's our trade deficit with Australia, with Canada, with Mexico, and so on, right? Economists call these bilateral trade deficits. Worrying about this is insane. Let me give you an example. I run a bilateral trade deficit with Trader Joe's. Every time I go there, I give them money and they give me stuff. And I also say to them while I'm there, I say, you know, I'm a pretty good economist. Would you like me to deliver an economics lecture while I'm in the store? I will accept your money. And they always say no. So I run that trade deficit. That's literally a trade deficit between Justin Wolfers and Trader Joe's.
Right.
I kind of think that's okay that Trader Joe's doesn't buy a lot of educational services from the University of Michigan. And I
Right.
kind of think it's okay that they're not buying meals from me either. But Trump is worried about that. And so the tariffs are set proportional to America's trade deficit with each country. So if Trader Joe's were another country, the United States would have a 100% tariff on Trader Joe's.
Mm-hmm.
Is my life going to be better if I can't get moderately good frozen meals from Trader Joe's? No. I'd have to eat the crap that I cook instead. And so that's what's driven each of these individual tariffs, and it leads to some profound absurdities. There's the country of Lesotho,
Right.
very, very poor country, which is lucky enough to live on top of some dirt that has diamonds underneath it.
Right.
Americans like diamonds, so they buy diamonds from Lesotho. People in Lesotho are very, very poor. They don't buy much stuff from America. We make very expensive, high-end stuff. So therefore, the United States runs a trade deficit with Lesotho. Trump thinks that's evidence that they're ripping us off and they must have very high tariffs on us. So he has just put very, very high tariffs on Lesotho. This makes no sense. It's literally crazy.
Right.
So what we have is an old man who misunderstands economics, who has surrounded himself with people who refuse to explain to him, literally refuse to explain to him that his ideas make no sense. That's the problem. So we've seen markets fall dramatically on the news of these tariffs. I think there's two things they're responding to. One, they're responding to tariffs are a bad idea. They're bad for America, bad for business, and American companies will be less profitable.
Right.
But the other thing is they've revealed the emperor has no clothes and there's no one there to save him. That this is a White House that will indulge the whims of a lunatic. And I think that worries me not just about the tariff debate, but everything that the United States will have to deal with. Apart from that, things are going well. So, Molly,
So,
what do our listeners need to understand about tariffs?
yeah.
I
What
already
do
know
they
everything.
need
I
to
can't answer the questions. You're going to have to ask them. I know everything.
So we saw overnight China decided that they were going to reciprocate, right?
Yeah.
That was what Scott Bessent had told them not to do. You'll remember Scott Bessent said, don't do anything because otherwise Trump will have to even tariff you more. China has made at least something of a friendship now with South Korea and Japan, famous for getting along really well with China. I'm being sarcastic. So that crew now feels that they're going to sort of have a NAFTA kind of situation, or at least perhaps maybe China has not been a great trading partner. But are we in a trade war already? It seems like we are.
I'm glad you didn't call it a global trade war. It's not. It's an American trade war.
Yeah.
We have one country putting on tariffs, and we
Yeah.
have other countries reciprocating to that one country.
Yeah.
And if anything, the rest of the world now is understanding that the United States is an unreliable partner And so they're probably going to integrate more closely, the opposite of a trade war, a trade peace. Look, here's the thing. There's a deep mistake being made. So Trump started off by beating up Canada and Mexico. And if you think about the North American continent, to use J.D. Vance's term, we have the cards, which is we are the biggest market in North America. And we are an incredibly important trading partner to both Mexico and Canada. And on this continent, there are only those countries. There's no other choices. But now what he's turned to is the rest of the world. Well, the thing is, the globe is 8 billion people. The United States is 340 million people. What Trump's tariffs do is make it hard for those of us in the 340 million in the United States to do business with the rest of the world. For those outside America looking for customers or for customers looking for goods, they've still got 7.66 billion people to trade with. This isn't so bad for them.
And the
For those of us in the
EU.
United States, we're cut off from the rest of the world.
Right.
How bad is this? Let me remind you that when the world was unhappy that Putin invaded Ukraine, and they didn't want to respond militarily, we imposed sanctions to cut the Russian people off from the rest of the world in the hope that would create enough political pressure they would overthrow Putin. What has Trump just done? Imposed sanctions that cut the American people off from the rest of the world. So he does it to his enemies, and today he's doing it to his voters.
Right. So now everything for us is more expensive.
Yes, and I want to go a step further. You might say, I'll tell you the truth, my family's thinking about buying a second car. We were going to buy an import. The price of the import went up. You might say, well, this is terrific. You'll buy American. What do you think GM does when all of its competitors raise their prices?
Lower their prices?
No.
Kidding. No.
They
Which
raise
we
their
saw
prices.
this during the pandemic, right? We saw that prices just go up. When they go up, everything goes up.
We actually have a really lovely example of this, which is the first Trump administration put tariffs on washing machines.
Right.
Which applied to the Korean-made Samsung or LG washers. So those prices all went up. And you know what happened? GM and Whirlpool and Maytag raised their prices just as much. There was no tariffs on them, but all of a sudden there was a lot less competitive pressure. So our prices are going up not just for imports, but also for goods that compete with imports.
It's not good. There's likely going to be a lot of very rich Trump donors going to Mar-a-Lago this weekend to try to beg him to stop doing this. If Trump were to were to go, oh my God, this was a huge mistake. Could he reverse this now, or has the war already started, the trade war?
Right. So in the first Trump administration, this was exactly the story, which is on Monday, he'd announced tariffs, and by Wednesday, they were off. And that happened over and over and over again. We also saw a hint of that with the tariffs on Canada and Mexico, which went on, then off, then off, then on, then on, then off. The noise I hear so far is that that's not going to happen. But the chances of a recession this year have risen over 50%.
Yeah.
So stocks have fallen literally trillions of dollars in the last few days.
Yeah.
And so there will be enormous pressure on the president to reverse course. If he were the first-term Trump president, the single best thing about him is that when the markets told him, don't do that, he listened. If he did that, actually, that would undo a lot of it. The Chinese would take off their retaliatory tariffs the next day, as would countries all around the world. What wouldn't be undone is the notion that the United States is not a reliable trading partner. Now, you might say, well, in 4 years' time we will be, because Trump will have been term limited. But actually, the judgment of global markets is deeper than that, which is the American people have shown themselves willing to elect people who will not live up to their agreements, will not cooperate, and are willing to turn the world on its head. And unless the American people have shown they've changed, that's going to remain a black mark against us and be a reason that people are uncomfortable entering long-term relationships with us.
If this goes the way it has historically gone, what would that look like?
You mean if the tariffs stay or if they would?
if they stay historically, right, for Trump, he has pivoted, but they say like the other two times that America has tariffed trade, the 1800s, the 1900s. How, just run the tape for me about what happened.
Well, so what's already going to happen is that prices are rising. Um, and the first step of prices rising is not going to be completely obvious, right? You could go to a car dealership today and they might be willing to sell you a car, but notice they're going to sell you a car at sticker price. Whereas 4 months ago, they would have, you
Right,
haggle for a while and they talk to their manager and they take $4,000 off the price.
right,
So there'll be a lot of price hikes that may not look like price hikes at first. But basically, imported goods are going to become more expensive, and then goods that compete with imported goods. And so, in the very, very short run, fruit and vegetables, a lot of them come from Mexico. But the larger items that many of us buy, cars, refrigerators, washing machines, all of those are going to become more expensive. Now, you might say, well, I've lived through this once. After the pandemic, I saw prices rise. Now, I just first of all want to note, when you say it's not so bad, it's just like the pandemic. Actually, the pandemic was bad.
no,
Um,
I'm not arguing
but
with you there.
it's important that people understand that this form of inflation that comes from tariffs is fundamentally different. So what happened during the pandemic is prices rose. And then what happens typically with inflation, including during the pandemic, wages rise to catch up. Now, not for everyone and not straight away, but most employers were like, oh, the cost of living went up last year. I'm going to give you a somewhat bigger pay bump than I otherwise would. Or people would change jobs to a new job that gave them a pay bump.
Right.
And so if prices rise, but your wages rise to catch up, you're kind of okay eventually. The thing is, when prices rise because of tariffs, there's no reason for your employer to raise your wage to help you keep up. So the form of inflation that tariffs cause is enormously more painful. Normal inflation, you've got to wait a year or two, your wages catch up. This, it's not catching up. So if the cost of living were to rise by, say, 6%, that's not 6% next year, that's 6% forever. I think median household earnings in the United States is about $100,000. So 6% is $6,000. If you've got another 50 years to live, what are we going to call that? $300,000 right there. That's a huge hit. And that's what's so painful about all of this.
Justin Wolfers, thank you for joining us.
I'm so glad to bring my upbeat views to the world. Hopefully
Yes,
we've got better
things
news in the
going
future.
great. Yeah, going great.